For today's training tip, I want to talk about tempo shifting. This is changing the pace of the fight, where if you're used to going at a low pace, you move into a very high pace mid-fight, maybe after a round. And this can really throw a monkey wrench into your opponent's plans because all the timing, range, and distance that he took to calculate in the first round has now totally been eradicated by this new tempo. I'm going to show you a quick example of this here. This is a very old video. I think this is from like 2005 or maybe 2004. This is me here. This is against Mike Fowler. I was coming off not training for maybe like 6 months or so. So I was out of shape. I was just here to coach my brother. And I had to show up. And they were giving me basically $500 if I could beat a random spectator in the audience. And $3,000 if that random spectator in the audience won. Now, I was expecting to get a white belt, so I agreed to this. And they drew Mike Fowler, who is an awesome grappler. And I had a size advantage, probably like 20, 30 pounds in him. So I had that going for me. But I knew at the beginning of this match, I was going to be in problems if I allowed this match to go long because I didn't have any cardio. So I told my brother before this match started, I want you to count to 20. And after 20 seconds, let me know. And I'm going to change my strategy. And my idea was I'm going to show up as a lumbering bear, very slow, like I'm taking my time. And at the 20-second mark, I'm going to start spazzing. And I'm hoping that that spazzing is going to throw him off his game plan and put me in a position to win. And you'll get to see what happens here. Not sure what's going on. Explaining the rules a little bit, perhaps. I believe it's a 5-minute match. So if you look at me here, I'm plodding around, slow, not much happening. I'm letting him be very comfortable. And that point, I started going hard on him and jumped into the guillotine. Now, that wasn't 20 seconds, so maybe it was a little shorter than 20. Maybe I said 15. But this is an arm inside guillotine. And it's end up, you're going to see here, I got a good angle at the end there as I started turning towards my left hip. And I get the tap there. Right? So that was pretty quick. I think it was under 30 seconds that I got this win. And again, this was just pace shifting. I started off slow. I let him get comfortable. And whenever my brother told me now, I remembered it as 20 seconds, but I guess it was shorter. I started going berserk. And that's when I started clubbing his head, shooting in, and started really driving in. And Mike Fowler told me afterwards that he panicked. And then he just panic shot, which gave me the entry for the guillotine, which ultimately ended up getting the finish. Right? So that's an example of tempo shifting in action, right? And if you watch strategic fighters, you'll see that they'll do this quite often. And this is a way of showing a new side of yourself to your opponent. Because remember, especially in MMA, when there's a lot of measuring out, that first round is like a feel out round, trying to figure out, okay, what's my range? How does this guy move? Does he move in and out? Is he always moving forward? Is he always moving backwards? What's the deal? And once they get that information, they start getting a little more comfortable because now they know how to approach you, right? And if they've studied tape on you, they might have some idea of how that's going to look like. But it's always different versus being in there. And that first round is usually reserved for that. Even in grappling, you'll see people kind of like feel each other out as far as like, how close can I get before this guy's trying to clinch up with me? Is he going to try to shoot, etc.? So when you can make these changes, you are becoming a new opponent. Because, for example, let's say you are low pressure where I'm kind of hanging back, right? So I'm on my feet. either standing still or stepping back, letting my opponent always walk into me. So I'm putting myself now in a position where I'm very reactionary, right? Where I'm reacting to their punches, their strikes, and countering. And I'm a counter striker type of, or counter wrestler type of approach. So this gives the opponent a read. Okay, I know I got to get closer. I have to try to corner him. Uh, I have to combine moves because he's always going to be able to defend the first movement. So I have to be chaining. When you go from that into high pressure, which maybe now instead of moving forward, you start moving backward. Instead of moving backwards, you start moving forward. So right away, when you do that, you're going to cause a collision immediately, which is going to throw your opponent off because they weren't expecting that collision, right? And now maybe instead of throwing one strike, you throw 3 or 4 at a time, right? So rather than just having to slip one, they have to react to 3 or 4 punches in a row. This changes the dynamic. Now the whole defense paradigm has shifted. And rather than in the same way in a grappling scenario, rather than just doing one takedown and quitting, now you start chaining your takedown sequences into 3 or 4 takedowns, back to back, chain wrestling. It's going to create a lot more tension. So he now has to make an entire adjustment of this high pace opponent when previously it was a low pace opponent. And the beauty of this is that you can go back and forth, right? Maybe I go high pressure for like a minute and then I step off the gas and go low pressure again. And if you can do this effectively, it's really hard for the opponent to get a good read on you. And when they can't get a good read on you, it's like a missile lock that never happens. He can't fire, right? He's just constantly trying to get that lock, but he's not able to get it because you're always changing your tempo. Now, sounds great in theory, but practicing it is a little bit trickier because we usually get into a certain gear when we start training or competing, and then it's hard to shift. So naturally, we have to incorporate this into our training in order to get results from this. And the easiest way of doing this is if you split this into rounds, right? For example, spar the same opponent for 2 rounds. First round, start off at a very slow pace where, as I said, perhaps you're moving backwards, you're counter-striking, counter-grappling, right? And you're letting them make all first moves and you're defending. Then the second round where you spar them, you're actually going to do the opposite. You're going to move forward. You're going to be very proactive and you're going to be making all the movements, right? Don't tell them you're going to do this, right? So you want what I want you to feel is the surprise effect, right? Of how it kind of shifts your opponent in a way that they're not sure how to read you. So give that a shot as far as spar the same guy 2 rounds, 1 round going at a slow pace, 1 round going at a very high pace, and see how it affects your opponent. I would imagine in most cases it's going to be a favorable result where you're going to get a lot more traction in all your movements and your strategy just because you're throwing this monkey wrench in. And when you can split it up into rounds, then at a certain point, you could figure out how to split it out within a round. Because suppose we are in grappling where it's just one long round. We obviously don't have to break in between and then you can change strategy. So figure out after a certain time period how to shift. Maybe it's like I said, I had my brother yell out, okay, now. And then that's when I started implementing a new tempo. So maybe you have a bell or a coach on the side that tells you when to shift strategy. And then you start shifting into it. These things are best planned, right? Obviously, if your coach said now and you never discuss what that meant, it means nothing to you, right? That's why you have to train it. So again, using sparring as an example here is a great way of doing this. Now, a few things to keep in mind. Shifting of your pace, just like it's challenging for the opponent, it may be challenging for you. Because if you're used to fighting at a low pressure pace, you might have difficulty going high pressure because it's exhausting, right? Because you have to actually be proactive. You're the one that's going to step into their line of fire and you're going to be the one leading the dance. This usually requires more conditioning, right? So improve the conditioning is going to be the answer here. Now, if you fight and you start training more at a higher pace, that is going to improve your conditioning, right? But you could also do things off on the side, any of your strength and conditioning stuff like working like alactic circuits or whatnot will improve that as well. But basically, besides psychologically being more adapted to being the guy to lead the dance and charging into the fire, you also need conditioning to improve so that you can keep that pace. An example of this going wrong, like I said, would be like this UFC 307, Khalil and Alex. Khalil was trying to fight a higher pace, but he's used to 3-round fights. And when it became a 5-round fight in round 4, he fell apart. Or round 3, really, he started to fall apart because he wasn't used to keeping that type of pace for so long. So that's an example of that, right? You have to be able to maintain a high pressure pace to be effective, right? Now, the opposite is true, which is that if you're used to high pressure, you might struggle to fight in low pressure because you become impatient, or maybe you're not used to being the one reacting, so you feel like you've lost control of the fight, right? Because now you're almost fighting your opponent's game plan, you might suspect. So one of the things is first, of course, be patient, and you want to be calculating and composed, where if you're going to be the one reacting, the way you have to think about it is that you're the one setting the traps, right? You're letting people walk into your traps. That's the way you have to contextualize it so that you're still in control of this, right? If you're fighting in a way where it's like, oh, my opponent's just doing whatever he wants and I'm just trying to get lucky, psychologically, you're at a huge disadvantage. But if you're thinking about it in a way like a spider, I'm creating a web and I'm going to allow this little fly to get stuck in it, psychologically, you're in a better spot. And you're going to need to have some good reaction time as well, because if you're letting someone else lead the dance, so to speak, you need to be able to, slip, block, sprawl, and counter all these things. So you might need to work on some reaction timing drills so that you can be very good at counter fighting. And these are just some basic examples of things that you might encounter. But overall, what I want you to pull away from this is work on shifting the tempo. If you always fight at one speed, you become very predictable. Being able to fight at multiple speeds, very high speed, very low speed, mid speed, right? All these things will help you gain advantages because you're not going to allow your opponent to get a good read on you. They're like, once they start figuring out how you fight, like at a slow pace, now you move very high pace, it's like crap, now they got to start all over again. And then you move down to middle, or you move back to high, right? And you start shifting it, and it has the same type of effect, if not more so, than a stance shift, right? Where like everything has to be recalculated now because the speed of the combat has changed. So try this in training. That's the best way to start. Going in training in your sparring rounds, try to pick the same opponent for 2 rounds and pick different speeds each round and see your results. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll be notified of all of my latest videos on YouTube. But really the best place to find all my content is my website, davidmma.com. You can register for free and get access to 4 free courses, including Kimura Fundamentals, Essential Half Guard Kimura, Essential Half Guard Passing, and much more.